Jen, thank you so much for coming back.
Oh, it is really good to come back into this space and explore together. I always feel like we unearth rare and unexpected gems together, and that is a precious gift to have with a friend.
Absolutely. Yeah. So last time where we left off on kind of a cliffhanger was what happens when we stop trying to fix ourselves, when we just get out of the way.
Yes, the desire, the compulsion, the pressure to fix ourselves is so embedded in our conditioning, in our social norms, in our relationships. Um, and so it becomes a very pathological thing when I'm constantly, when you have a wound and you keep picking at it, it cannot heal. And it will continue to be traumatized. And in some ways, that is some of what happened even as I was writing my dissertation about my autoethnography is my research where I'm I myself in the field of research, but by the end of it, I was like, wow, I've picked myself to death. Probably apropos, I just didn't have any more ways that I could possibly look at myself. And yet I was still not fully within myself in a kind and loving, gentle way. I was within myself in a very um, critical way.
Yeah, I think there's something quite subtle in that shift, isn't there? I mean, it's both overt and subtle in the sense that I think until we've really had a taste of that kindness and gentleness and love, we often don't, we've not really experienced it before, right? I think, as you say, when the whole culture is skewed towards, wrongness and rightness, fixing and changing and managing all of that, I think all we know within ourselves is the energy of that. And for me, I started to recognize what that energy was rather than it being a kind of just the water I was swimming in, as it were. I started to feel into the fact that it was a kind of a sort of hunting down or a coming at things from a very particular sort of approach or angle, which inherently was finding them deficient or wanting or wrong or to be got rid of. And I think it's difficult to describe the intense relief that happens when we stop doing that.
Yes, it is a sigh of relief from all the inner parts that have been so scared by these lights we've been shining inside of ourselves this whole time that now they can breathe. And maybe without all those bright lights on, they will come forward on their own because the space is trustworthy.
Beautifully put. Yeah, I think the trustworthiness of this space is key, isn't it? I mean, who's going to come out of hiding when there's searchlights and dogs barking and guards with guns, which is kind of how it is, isn't it? I mean, we're laughing because we both know our own experience of this, that there's something about the falling apart of that allows things to start to just kind of peer above the parapet to see if it's safe.
Yes, if you imagine shadows and shadow work, um, I don't know that those shadows can fully be entered into with searchlights. Um, because imagine if you've been in the dark your whole life and somebody comes in with lights and you can't even see, your eyes can't adjust. What does it mean to be in this world? I've been in the dark my whole life. Oh, okay. Well, then my job is to go down in the dark with the very gentle ambient light and sit down in the dark with the parts of me that only have night vision, that cannot see in the light, that I am harming by trying to force to see in the light. I have found that those parts of me that I have allowed to come up in their own time and space into the light have gained their own kind of ability to be in the light in a way that I couldn't have predicted nor helped, really, because it was its own unfolding for that particular part.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think when we talk about stop trying to fix, we're also talking about stopping coming at things with any kind of idea of how to be with something because of what you just said. I think as these parts emerge, the unconditionality of the space is a key requisite to that because exactly they will find their own way. Their unfolding will be their unique unfolding. And I think any time we have any idea, even if it seems to be a kind of benign idea, like, oh, we accept everything, or even that runs interference with that natural organic process that you just described.
Right. We just don't know what the purpose of a part of ourselves is within ourselves and in the world. I didn't know that Ruth, the part of me that was born when I had a dark night as a baby, having cancer treatment, I didn't know that 52 years later, I would be publishing a book in which Ruth was my co-narrator. I didn't know that. That is not, well, I didn't have that on my bingo card. Couldn't have imagined that was going to happen, but that is what has arisen in this negotiation we have been having between me and this part of myself since for all these decades. And turns out that that part very much wants a voice and wants to speak in the world. And what an honor on my part to be a vessel for that part to come through and speak of the world. But I have just as many parts that I have met that want nothing to do with the world, nothing to do with the light, nothing to do with healing, nothing to do with fixing, alchemizing, metabolizing. No thanks. Just glad we met. Going back to my place. See you later. That's it.
I think there's something really important in saying that when we're not talking about ending up fixing by some sort of default route where we think that by sort of fixing by stealth, that by not fixing somehow there'll be a fixing. I love what you just said, and the same here. If there's been many times when there's been some part or some feeling that's not wanted any of that at all, and it's been very clear to the point of being adamant, like don't come at me with any of that stuff. Like, don't think I'm interested in all your end games around this. And I think there's something in the energy of that I've really come to appreciate. I love the fact, just going back to what you were saying about Ruth, that you went from, and we were talking about this last time, you went from seeing that part as a stress addiction, an addiction to stress, to, that journey from it being perceived as an stress addiction, to now being Ruth, the fully fledged co-narrator of your book, I think is such a glorious illustration of what we're saying, that what we've perceived to be damaged, wrong, inadequate, sometimes turns out to be some of our greatest resources.
Yes, they are some of our strongest allies in the world. Even the ones in me who refuse to do anything with the light, anything to do with healing, even they, I know, are way down deep in my inner world, loving me, not for anything except for they are seen. In this home, they are welcome. In this house, they can live however they need to live, and I'm just going to take care of our space. That's all I need to do.
Yes. So I think there's something, maybe there's a little bit more to be said about this space. I mean, in my experience, the words that often come is that it's the space of unconditionality, or sometimes love, but the key thing about it is that it isn't a space that I'm doing. I'm I'm within it and I'm of it, and my willingness is somehow intrinsic to it. But that this meaning the whole of me and all that includes, this can be exactly as it is in that space in each moment. And I think that's what starts to build once the trying to fix starts to ebb away. And of course, we still notice sometimes those tendencies, that energy to fix might well come up within that space. But I think there's something that changes so fundamentally when there is a knowing of that deep sense that it's okay to be this here.
I don't know if in the UK you have, but in the United States, we had when we were kids, we had what was called a safe houses. There was a sign on the window or on the yard, and it meant that whoever lived in that house was a safe person. If you were in a child in an emergency, you could go to that safe house and they would take care of you, call your parents, call the police, whatever you needed. It was a safe house. And I think about that often because what I have realized is that I myself am my own safe house. And any of my parts, past, present, or future, are welcome here. I care deeply about my nervous system, about my inner world, the house that I am, and I'm going to be a safe place for me. And that orientation changes everything for all those parts inside because they're like, oh, I really can depend on her to listen when I say something or yank somewhere. Or I can really depend on her to rest when we need rest. Yeah, all the ways I show up for me are all the ways that I build trust inside my house.
Beautiful. I want to come back to houses in a moment because there's more to say about houses, but I just want to share. I remember a few years ago, I had the seeing that I'd been shaming my past selves, that there was a narrative that went something like, and I think this is very common, I used to be that, but I got over that and now I'm this. I used to be that thing, but now I'm this better thing. And I suddenly saw the pain of the shaming of the past selves, and saw this whole gallery of past selves. And there was something that kept repeating, something like, no more blaming, shaming, or wrong making. And that was a big, a big block in the building of that safe house. I love what you said about, the actual existence of those safe houses, and how that correlates with building, with creating our own. When we shared some notes about what we were going to talk about, you wrote, the inner house is a metaphor for the soul under renovation. how dismantling, mess, and reconstruction shape my understanding of wholeness.
Yes, isn't it interesting to think about ourselves as a renovation project of sorts, and which requires some fixing. It does require a kind of orientation towards myself, that there's parts of me that are under construction, but there's also parts of rooms of me that um, don't want to get touched right now. I don't have it in my budget, metaphorically, to go take care of certain rooms, but there are things that I'm always working on. You know, taking care of a house requires a certain level of maintenance. And so in this metaphor for me, that's self-care, loving myself, being gentle with myself. Those are the things that keep my inner house um in running smoothly, harmoniously. Um, but I think for a lot of people, the dark night arises out of a forgetting that we are even a house, and that we can come back into our space and have a spirit of bringing attention and care and tending and gentleness to a house. And through that care and tending and gentleness, the house that was forgotten or never really known starts to come alive. And I mean, if you've ever walked into a house that's abandoned, I mean, you know that houses die when they're not lived in. They don't, houses need presence, aliveness to be lived in. And so, for a lot of us, that dark night arises because we have forgotten that we're even a house and we're kind of an abandoned house. And so coming back into the space and just saying, maybe I am a house. And maybe just for today, I'm going to take my little rag of presence and clear off some cobwebs in my space. Just one thing to make the light come on in this space. And over time, you start doing more things, and there are other parts and other rooms, and oh, wow, I've never gone in that room before. What's in there? I'm feeling pretty good in the rest of my house. Maybe I'll go into that room, and maybe the door will get slammed shut on me, and that whatever's in that room is gonna say, "Nope, you're not allowed in here." But that's being a living house.
I love this metaphor. I feel like it could run for a while. Just to share, a couple of weeks before the beginning of my dark night, I had a dream, and it was something along the lines of walking through my house and realizing that I think one of the ceilings had collapsed. And in the dream, I get my mother, which is, of course, interesting in itself. And we phoned the woman from the insurance company about doing an underpinning job. That was the word. They were the words that came. So there's this sense of a collapse in the house and it needing underpinning. And of course, I had no idea of the significance of that until, everything crashed a couple of weeks later. And it was really clear to me quite early on that the house had collapsed because it was built on sand. It was that biblical story of the house built on sand as opposed to the house built on rock. And I think what you say about taking the cloth of presence, that's such a great phrase. And even to walk into the house and survey the damage, right? The wreckage, even to turn towards the front door, open it and start to have a look in, is the bringing of presence into the house and the start of, I guess, the process that we're talking about.
And I'm choked up because I witness you, this being of a beautiful home built on a strong and beautiful foundation that is felt by everyone who knows and loves you. And I think, yeah, it you're right. It's just opening the door and entering and loving the space with a little bit of presence can light up and create the most epic and magnificent of homes on the inside. Wow.
Beautiful. I'm welling up now because I know you know so well what that takes and what that means. That we're not talking some sort of big heroic happening. We're talking day by day, just little moments of doing that, taking the cloth, and some days that's unbearable or intolerable, or we just can't do it, and we find ourselves having to just run out of the house again to keep the metaphor going. And yet there's something about that being willing. I mean, you talked about dismantling mess and deconstruction. I think that is what's happening in the dark night, right? There is this whole sort of old structures in the house collapsing, and a standing back and going, wow, like how do I possibly begin when this is all fallen apart? And yet there is something about understanding that out of the mess will be some kind of reconstruction.
Yes, that born in every deconstruction project, there is an inherent reconstruction project. And I've knocked a lot of walls down inside myself, but I've built a lot of walls too, and that's actually a quote from the book. I find great joy now building and this infrastructure within me. A lot of times that looks like the addition of new tools, new rooms, uh, or old patterns coming through, old selves that I have perhaps not met, but because my kitchen happens to be filled with all kinds of fancy tools, I have a lot things now that I can bring to selves that are arising that I didn't have, 12, 13 years ago. So the more expansive and lived in my house becomes, the more capable I am of not just expanding in lots of beautiful ways, but also being more efficient in how I meet and love and care for parts of myself that are wounded parts, right? Like now
Yeah.
my next book is about infant trauma and baby Jenny and everything that baby Jenny went through, and I'm sure that I couldn't have come to a point to write this book had I not had these tools I've been stacking inside my house for all these years, that I can meet her, baby Jenny, this self part, with prepared, right? So I don't get lost in that work. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to say, we'll link to your book in the show notes. It's called The Alchemy of Being a House. Is there more that you'd like to say about the alchemy part of this? I mean, I'm reminded of what you were saying about tending and gentleness and kindness, which feel like they're very much at the front of the alchemical toolbox, so to speak. What else would you say about the alchemy part?
So for me, alchemy in just the most simple terms is just the art of transformation. And as uh, I look at that art of transformation, the art of alchemy, there are certain parts of it that are pretty constant, like um, separating. Separation is a large part of the alchemic process. And you can see this in the dark night of the soul, when you're separated from, usually from your ordinary life, from your family, from all kinds of ways you get separated in the dark night of the soul. That's an alchemic process. Disillusion, dissolving in your book, you talk about the dissolving of the false self going away. Um, and that's such an intrinsic part of finally then being able to connect with other selves as those false selves that have been running the show dissolve away, up start arising other selves that now can be in a functional relationship we can be in a functional relationship with, because those false selves have dissolved and something new is fermenting. Fermentation is a very big part of alchemy. So there's and these are all parts of my book too. I'm not teaching alchemy in my book, but I do use these as metaphors for understanding this art of transformation that's really always happening in life. And it never happens in a linear progression, right? And sometimes we're dissolving in some ways and, distilling our wisdom in other ways and coming together in other ways. But then suddenly in that way, we go back all the way back and we start dissolving again. So alchemy, I think, is just a really good framework for understanding that we are transformative beings, and that spirit of transformation can look a lot of different ways for us. And so, if you're going through the dark night, for example, and you feel like, wow, I've really come a long way and everything seems to be going so great, and then bam, something really bad happens and it feels like you've been set back, but that's not what's really happening. What's really happening is there's a fermentation happening, and just like good wine, and it takes some time and maybe has to come back and sit for a minute, and then there's a rebirth, reblossoming, something arises from that. But it can feel, without that framework, like you're just getting sloshed around in this alchemic soup of transformation, and it doesn't, so just having a framework for understanding is helpful. Yeah, practical alchemy is what I am an advocate for.
I think alchemy is such a useful framework for this. As you were talking there, my sense is that what we often perceive of as destructive processes, like the separating, the dissolving, the burning phase, we can easily mistake, as you were saying, for something that they're ultimately not, even though they do have a kind of, they are destructive, that it's destruction in the service to reconstruction or creation. And I love what you said about fermentation. I think there's something then in the understanding that you can't hurry wine. You can't like cajole it or bully it into fermenting any faster than it is. That this is a process, a natural process that is going to take the time it takes. And yeah, I think what I'll try and do is just write a little in the show notes, maybe about the alchemic process and the basic steps of that, because I think they are so useful in this context.
Yes, that's 7 stages of spiritual alchemy. And also to remember, as you're playing around with these 7 stages, that they will often happen, like I said, in a nonlinear way. They don't always happen step by step. And that too is alchemy, right? And that too is alchemy. I think the thing about alchemy is it can never be anticipated. It can never be expected or planned. It arises through synchronicity, and one's particular signature scent of healing and unfolding that it can be replicated.
Oh, I really like that one's particular signature scent. Yes, because when we start to get the whiff of that scent, then we can start to feel into what our particular alchemical process is, and start to understand how to kind of move with that. Yes, I love that.
Yeah, it's almost like it yes, once you sense it and identify the scent, then it's like, oh, 'cause for example, for me now, when dark nights of the soul happen or challenges happen or whatever, I know immediately. I can feel the alchemical swirls and all of these the dissolving of things. I those patterns are really clear to me because I know how they operate in my particular alchemic field of transformation, and that I think is true for every unique individual. I think the most important thing, and just dovetailing off of this last conversation, is really trusting the alchemy of your own house, and not it's fine to look at other people's houses. And it's fine to take notes about how other people live in their houses, but no one lives in their house the way you need to live in your house. No one heals in their house the way you need to heal in your house. Um, and so recognizing that each of us are unique in our own unfolding in our own houses, allows for a lot of creativity and wonder and play and beauty to arise that is a once upon a once. I mean, what we're talking about is that inside each of us is a house that we have the opportunity to not just live in, but share with others, invite others into, um, hold others in and love them and cook them meals inside of our inner home and send them out in the world. But that can only happen once we've inhabited our own home, and we're the only ones with the key to our house. We're the ones who can unlock that door. So, uh, I just wanna encourage anybody listening to grab their keys to their house in whatever way that feels right and true, and start to, if you haven't already, start to behold the wonder that is your inner home.
Yes, 1,000% to all of that. I think when we start to feel into what you just described, the fact that only we can know how living in our houses and how it needs to move. I think there's something qualitatively different that starts to happen. I think partly because then any idea of comparison falls away and we can start to really a process of discovery, right? I mean, there's real discovery in alchemy. And I guess you could say that whilst there's immense pain in alchemy, the upside is wonder and discovery and awe at what is created within the alchemical process. And I think so key to that is what you said, that, nobody can know ahead of time what needs to move in any given moment. I mean, both of us have been in this alchemical swirl for a long period of time now, and we know that, we have no idea within what's going to emerge in the next 10 minutes, let alone more than that. So any idea at second guessing this or coming at it with some sort of schema, just that's just not what this is. That isn't what's going to take us into this lived experience of being in our house in all the gloriousness of that. And I think that kind of neatly leads us into the next piece of what I wanted to talk about, which is, we often, obviously, our body is is an essential, intrinsic aspect of our house. And in the notes that we shared, you mentioned, you wrote, "My body's breakdown is spiritual threshold. Disability and illness is a forced descent, a collapse of identities, and an initiation into a different kind of presence," which I mean, I don't usually share notes, but that was just so beautiful. Wherever you'd like to begin with that, I know there's a lot in there.
I always wonder how our world would be different if we imagine broken bodies not as something to fix, but as a doorway. And for me, my body has absolutely been a doorway to my inner world. Um, and I'm grateful for this body, broken as it is, uh, painful as it is, hard to move around as it is. This body has been a portal to that has allowed me to go so deeply into my inner world. I mean, just practically speaking, because I spend a lot of time in chronic pain in bed. Uh, if you're laying there a lot and reconciling with your pain all day, you tend to notice things that are happening in your inner world that people who are able-bodied and working and aren't laying down all the time may miss. Um, so many parts of me within are parts that arise from pain and chronic pain, and I wouldn't have these beautiful parts of me had I not had chronic pain and disability and mobility challenges. Um, and I love them. I love all of the parts within me. I have an entire jam band of musicians that live inside of me that are making instruments from broken things inside of me that make music that is only capable of sounding through me and this broken body. That to me is beautiful. I wouldn't want to be any other body. But I will only want to be inside this beautiful dynamic body. So I really see my brokenness as the threshold, as the doorway that I have used to develop a very robust and healthy relationship with myself. That if I had had an abled body, I don't know that I would have um, found this rich inner world and known all of these parts of me. I mean, Lydia, my backstabber who I have broken rods in my spine, and Lydia comes up from behind and, y'all, Lydia, it sucks, it hurts, but hey, Lydia's part of me. She's been there. She has her role in things she does. I'm not going to go in there and can't cut her out. It is the reality of my body that I have lots of broken hardware in my spine. My spine is broken in multiple places. Might as well name it, love it, enjoy it, create a nice home for us. Yeah.
I mean, I'm just feeling reverence right now. I mean, there's something so immensely powerful to me that what is often seen as deficit and damage is actually the site of immense knowing and beauty and creativity. And that, in philosophy, there's an understanding that our access to certain types of knowledge is dependent on how we're situated. And I think what you just shared is such a brilliant example of that cited as you are with the spine held up with pins and everything else that's going on is both understandably this site of pain, but also this site of this immensity that you would never have had access to were that not the case. And I think it's very common, or certainly not unusual in the dark night, for people to encounter some version of broken-bodiedness in some way. I mean, for me, it was my thyroid going completely offline and my hormones going haywire. And I understood quite early on that without that stopping, the momentum would have carried on. My able-bodiedness would have carried me through that with the kind of force and fixing that we were talking about at the beginning. And to understand that as albeit a forced descent, a coming into this threshold which opens up like a different world, essentially, is so powerful.
It's I wouldn't trade it for anything. And I live in tremendous daily pain and have for decades. And I wouldn't trade it for anything because I can genuinely stand within the home that I am, that includes this body, this mind, my soul, my spirit, all of it. And I love it. I welcome it. I am a safe house. I am a house of love for every single part of me, even the parts that are falling off and hurting me. Even that uh, is really the only way that I can make peace with the real suffering of my life.
I live with somebody who has been and sometimes is in intense chronic pain. And I think it's really important to say that we're not being in any way glib about this, that the immensity of chronic physical pain is a whole other order over and above intense emotional pain. And that to arrive at the point that you have is quite something. You know, that's a coming into our inner experience to the felt reality of pain. I think again is such a different thing than coming into the felt reality of our psychic pain, our emotional pain, because there's no way out of it. Right? I mean, there is absolutely no escaping from it on any level. And you talked about an initiation into a different kind of presence. What's your sense of the quality of that presence?
Well, anybody who's ever experienced significant pain will tell you that there's a deep holiness and a very particular kind of presence when you are in on the very edge of level 8, 9, 10 pain. Um, and you're right, Fiona, there's nowhere to go. So you're up against the wall with what feels like the entire universe pressing up against you in so much pain. What are you going to do? What are you going to do? Well, there's a lot of different approaches I take. I mean, I don't just go, "Oh my God, I love you, pain." You know, I'm lucky to have a lot of tools. Breath work, uh, meditation, music, my family, snacks, all kinds of ways that I have and tools. But you're right. The ultimate metabolizing of that level of intense pain is to crawl all the way up into the tip of that holiness and say, yes, even this, I'm still here. I'm not gonna disassociate. I'm not going to, you know, I could go crawl into a room inside my house and not look at it. Maybe I will. Maybe I need to do that. But for the most part, what I choose to do is to move all the way up into it and just say, I'm here, alive, and I'm here. That's all I got. I don't want to fix it. I want to change it. I don't want to make it go away. I just want to be here. And that's enough. That's it.
I think there's really something in that sense of even this. You know, I think the dark night is is the beginning of this alchemical process we've been talking about, which where the edges of our consciousness are constantly sort of on the move. And I think even this is the phrase that really sums that up for me, that each time we encounter something that we think is unfeelable, unconscionable, intolerable, at some point in that, inevitably there is some measure of even this. That isn't happening because we're using some kind of will construct. We're not forcing ourselves into it, but that I think it comes about through that presence that you were just talking about, that at some point when we're here in that way, there is a natural sense that comes in of even this.
Have you noticed, I'm sure you have in your work that when you resist the pain, it almost like solidifies it. It almost turns it into something that is just unmovable. And that the even this somehow takes what feels unmovable and dissolves it just a little bit, because there's not any resistance there. There's just maybe a little surrender, maybe just a little, even this. And that process of alchemy starts to happen. And you get a little bit of dissolution of that pain, just slightly somewhere. There's a little bit of relief from meeting it.
I'm thinking of our house metaphor, and I get this sense that when we're very naturally resisting, I mean, God knows, of course we resist because, we're talking about pain, be it physical or emotional, that's often excruciating. When we're resisting, it's as if the door and the window, the doors and windows are all firmly shut, right? And whatever's in the room then can do nothing other than be in the room. Whereas when even if we open the door, just a tiny bit, there's something then, maybe there's some airflow or there's, something can start to move in some way, or it can start to reveal itself in whatever ways it does. It also comes to me to acknowledge that the kind of territory that we're talking about and this kind of very physical suffering is often very much left out of the spiritual dialogue, or simply transposed into some sort of metaphysical thing that, if you just sorted out your thinking, you'd realize it wasn't real, or, that kind of stuff. And I just want to say, how detrimental that is, how difficult that is for anybody who's dealing with, the physical, painful realities of chronic conditions.
Yes, there's all kinds of spiritual bypasses and some of them are maybe necessary sometimes. Maybe we're not at a place where we're ready to work with something and you need a spiritual
Yeah.
pass that's helpful. I know people who live in spiritual bypass land and stay there, and that's just, because you don't have to really deal with real life when your mind isn't real and reality isn't real and others aren't real and all of that dialogue that we frequently hear in especially in modern non-duality circles. I find those to be helpful for some people, but for those who are really on the ground of wanting to do deep alchemical work and unfold and awaken the house within, there's no bypassing. There's only one way in, and it's through the front door, and you cannot bypass anything, you know?
Yes.
There's all those little tricks of, your thoughts are not real. Well, they're really real when you're pressed to the point of wanting to end your life because your thoughts are so loud. They're real. So Yeah, it's kind of like it's kind of like a luxury spa for your, but it's spiritual. Like you can go there and hang out and you can get pampered, but you actually won't go into the real healing place. Yeah.
I love that. I mean, I think when we've taken that step through the door or, in the dark night, I think we basically get sort of shoved through the front door, don't we? Big push. In my experience, any time I try to go off down some other, go into some room that wasn't real, or try to sort of nip out of the house and go down to the spa, something, a beam would fall down and, knock me out. Or, there would be something that would happen that would drag me back, sometimes kicking and screaming, into this, like constantly like coming back to this and being faced with this. And of course, when everything in us uh has arisen in order to not be into this is the last place we want to be, right? But I think, as you said, it's understanding that it's only here that the alchemy can take place, right? The process can't happen anywhere else but here in this house.
I would say the alchemy is happening even in those kind of side paths, side quests we take to try to
Yeah, that's
um,
true.
it's just a different type of one of those other steps of, the separation. Maybe we need to separate from our house for a while and go play in the land of, reality is just an illusion for a while because we need that space in our particular alchemic soup of creating. That's okay, but it's when you get up inside that and really start bringing high quality attention to your thoughts, your body, your inner home, parts within you. That's when to me, the real joy and fun and excitement and pain and sorrow and breakdown, but also some really cool things because maybe in your whole life you've never even known those parts of your that's really the sadness to me of the people who get stuck at the spiritual luxury spa is because those they'll never know that home within themselves. They'll only know of it conceptually through beliefs and ideas, but not the actuality of what it is to be a living house of parts and feelings and real thoughts and ideas that deserve high quality attention. So to me, it's kind of a shame because in my book, there's a dog that lives in my house, and I think it's kind of sad to think about that. Some people have animals in their house that nobody ever comes home to take care of because they're so busy at the luxury spa that they don't ever come home to take care of and feed what needs to be fed.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's beautifully put. Jen, is there anything else to share, or anything else you'd like to share?
Well, I just want to say how grateful I am for you and your work, which I know is life giving, life saving for so many of us who are going through the dark night. And it's medicine so deeply needed right now in this time. And I just want to thank you for giving me this opportunity to, share my home with your home. We have a homecoming together for both of us. And uh yeah, I would like to say from my home to anyone's home that's listening, may your home be filled with light and presence and love.
Beautiful. Jen, love you tons. Thank you so much. See you soon.